friend of mine. I may have gone to dinner with her a few times, but it was never like we were dating. We were never boyfriends and girlfriends.
Have you ever had a date from hell?
I invited Eddie Murphy to my house one time. He's not gonna like that. And I invited him to dinner. And I remember he said, yeah, I'll be there. And I pre-cooked and all the stuff, and he never came.
Whitney said, guess who just called? And I said, who? She said, Eddie. He must be out of his mind. Matter of fact, he is out of his mind. He's gonna call me on my wedding day and tell me that I'm making a mistake.
At 64, Eddie Murphy finally tells the truth about Whitney Houston. For over 3 decades, he's kept one secret buried deeper than any Hollywood scandal.
She was a beautiful person with a really, I hear a lot of people talking about her sense of humor. She really did have a great sense of humor. She was a funny girl.
Eddie Murphy didn't just know Whitney Houston. She was the love of his life.
So the conversation went, only Whitney's in. Yes, I am getting married. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And obviously she did.
She did.
July 18th, 1992. Whitney's wedding day. One desperate phone call. You're making a mistake, he begged. She hung up. 3 hours later, she married Bobby Brown instead. This is the story of a love that could have changed everything, if only he'd been brave enough to fight for it when it mattered. So, let's get into it. In 1985, 2 young black superstars were quietly taking over America. Eddie Murphy had conquered Saturday Night Live and was becoming the biggest movie star in the world with Beverly Hills Cop. Whitney Houston had just released her debut album and was on her way to becoming the voice of a generation. When their paths crossed in the mid-'80s, something electric happened that both would spend decades pretending meant nothing. The rumors started immediately. Reports suggested that Eddie Murphy and Whitney Houston dated in the mid-1980s, when their respective careers were just starting to take off, and various sources maintained that they were once deeply enamored with each other. Whitney Houston and Eddie Murphy dated in the late 80s, reportedly falling head over heels for one another. But this wasn't just any celebrity fling. Whitney's friend, Ellen White, told People magazine that the late I Will Always Love You icon was so besotted with Murphy that she made her friends watch his 1988 film, Coming to America, on multiple occasions. I watched them once at a party. Eddie came in. Cameras were flashing, and they just looked at each other and talked and laughed like they were the only 2 people in the room. The intensity was real, but so was the secrecy. Both stars were at crucial points in their careers where image meant everything. Whitney was being positioned as America's sweetheart, the perfect pop princess who could cross over to mainstream audiences. Eddie was the comedy king who couldn't afford romantic scandals. Their relationship had to exist in shadows.
Have you ever had a date from hell?
I invited Eddie Murphy to my house one time. He's not gonna like that. And I invited him to dinner. And I remember he said, yeah, I'll be there. And I pre-cooked and all the stuff, and he never came.
Even Whitney herself would later laugh about Eddie's unreliability. The man who was conquering Hollywood couldn't commit to a simple dinner date, but according to those closest to Whitney, his absence hurt more than she let on. Houston was reportedly very enamored with the comedian, and Houston's good friend Robin Crawford also addressed Murphy and Houston's relationship in her book, A Song for You, My Life with Whitney Houston. Crawford wrote that even as Houston was building a relationship with Brown, she was more interested in Eddie Murphy, but he was elusive. The word elusive tells the whole story. Eddie Murphy was Hollywood's golden boy, fielding offers from every major studio, dating models and actresses, living the bachelor life to the fullest. Whitney Houston was rising fast, but still establishing herself. The power dynamic was uneven, and Eddie held all the cards.
Yeah, I spent some time around her socially, and she was a beautiful person with a really, I hear a lot of people talking about her sense of humor. She really did have a great sense of humor. She was a funny girl.
When Eddie describes Whitney now, you can hear something in his voice, a tenderness, a genuine affection that goes beyond casual friendship. He didn't just think she was beautiful. He thought she was genuinely funny, genuinely special. But in the 1980s, timing and circumstances worked against them. Record executive Clive Davis was heavily involved in Whitney's career, and their relationship was very close, especially in the 80s and 90s. And he also recalled Houston actually dating Murphy in an interview with The Griot. In a 2004 interview with Sister to Sister, transcribed by blog Classic Whitney, Houston herself remembered the night she first met Brown, and says she was going with Eddie at the time. Going with Eddie! Those three words confirm what Hollywood insiders always knew but publicly denied. Whitney Houston and Eddie Murphy were together, at least in some capacity, when she first encountered Bobby Brown at the 1989 Soul Train Awards. What happened that night would change the trajectory of Whitney's entire life. By late 1988, Eddie had met Nicole Mitchell, the model who would become his first wife. Murphy met model Nicole Mitchell in 1988, and the two got married in 1993. His window with Whitney was closing, but she was still hoping for something more substantial. When Bobby Brown walked into her life with his bad boy charisma and single-minded pursuit, Whitney had to make a choice between the man who was emotionally unavailable and the man who wanted her completely. She chose passion over safety. She chose the man who showed up over the man who stood her up for dinner. It was a decision that would define the rest of her life. July 18th, 1992. Whitney Houston's wedding day. 800 guests were gathering at her New Jersey estate for what was supposed to be the social event of the year. The pop princess was marrying the bad boy of R&B, and the media was calling it a match made in music heaven. But inside the bridal suite, a phone call was about to reveal just how complicated Whitney's heart really was. On the 18th of July, 1992, Whitney and Bobby were due to marry at her estate. But on that very morning, she received a phone call from Eddie. Whitney was already in her wedding dress when the phone rang. Her friend Robin Crawford was there helping with final preparations when Whitney answered.
And I came into the room, and Whitney said, "Guess who just called?" And I said, "Who?" She said, "Eddie. He must be out of his mind. Matter of fact, he is out of his mind. He's going to call me on my wedding day and tell me that I'm making a mistake."
The conversation that followed was brief but devastating. That day, Eddie Murphy called to say she was making a mistake, Crawford wrote, but she pressed ahead. According to Crawford, the conversation went with Whitney saying, "Yes, I am getting married. Yes, I am. Yes, I am," while Eddie pleaded with her to reconsider. Why would Eddie Murphy, the man who had been elusive and unavailable for years, suddenly call on her wedding day? The timing reveals everything about his true feelings. This wasn't casual concern from a friend. This was desperation from a man who realized he was about to lose the woman he loved to someone he knew was wrong for her. Eddie had watched Bobby Brown's career, knew his reputation, understood the kind of lifestyle and values he represented. More importantly, Eddie knew Whitney. He understood her vulnerability, her deep need for genuine love and protection, her tendency to give everything to relationships even when they were harmful.
So the conversation went, only Whitney's in, "Yes, I am getting married. Yes, I am. Yes, I am." And obviously she did.
She did.
But why didn't Whitney listen? By 1992, she had experienced Eddie's pattern of emotional unavailability for years. When someone consistently shows up late, cancels plans, and keeps you at arm's length, it becomes impossible to trust their sudden declarations of love. Bobby Brown, whatever his flaws, had pursued Whitney with single-minded devotion. He showed up. He committed. He made her feel chosen in a way Eddie never had. Murphy was apparently also invested in Houston. Crawford also wrote that Houston received a phone call from Murphy on the morning of her wedding to Brown. The fact that Crawford specifically noted Eddie's investment suggests this wasn't just friendly concern. Eddie Murphy was calling because he was in love and panicking. The cruel irony is that Eddie's phone call probably confirmed for Whitney that she was making the right choice. If he really loved her, where had he been for the past few years? Why was he only speaking up now, when it was too late? His timing made him look selfish rather than sincere. 3 hours after hanging up on Eddie Murphy, Whitney Houston walked down the aisle to marry Bobby Brown. On July 18, 1992, Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown wedded her home in front of a star-studded guest list of 800 people. But according to those who were there, something had changed in her demeanor after that phone call. The joy wasn't quite as bright. The smile wasn't quite as genuine. After her wedding to Bobby at the Royal Hotel in Manhattan, Whitney returned from their honeymoon in Capri, Italy, with a 3-inch-long scar that ran from the top of her cheek to her jaw. It was inflicted by Bobby during a vicious battery. The honeymoon violence was just the beginning of a pattern that would define their marriage. Eddie Murphy's warning had been prophetic, but by the time its accuracy became clear, it was too late for anything except regret. After Whitney's wedding, Eddie Murphy made a choice that would haunt him for decades. He stepped back and watched from a distance. Murphy met model Nicole Mitchell in 1988, and the two got married in 1993. The couple welcomed 5 children together. He built his own family, focused on his career, and tried to forget about the woman who had chosen someone else. But Hollywood is a small world, and Whitney's struggles became impossible to ignore. By the time of their divorce in 2007, their marriage had become a mainstay of the gossip columns, due in large part to rumors of infidelity, heavy drug use, allegations of physical abuse, and diminishing professional careers. The transformation was devastating to watch. The Whitney Houston of the 1980s had been vibrant, confident, and seemingly invincible. Whitney Houston's songs, You Give Good Love, My Love for You, Greatest Love of All, and Saving All My Love for You, from her self-titled inaugural February 1985 studio album, all peaked at #1 on the Billboard charts. The multi-platinum album became the biggest-selling record by a solo female artist, with over 14 million copies sold. But by the late 1990s, the woman Eddie had known was disappearing. Rolling Stone published a story in June 2000 stating that Cissy Houston and others had held a July 1999 intervention in which they unsuccessfully attempted to persuade Whitney to obtain drug treatment. The drug use that had started in her teens was now consuming her life.
I know when I was around Whitney, I never saw any diva-ness, and I never saw her do any drugs. I never saw her do anything.
Eddie's memories of Whitney are frozen in time. The young woman who respected his preferences, who hid her cigarettes because she knew he disapproved. The contrast with what she became is heartbreaking. He never saw the diva behavior, never witnessed the drug use, never experienced the chaos that would later define her public image. The pattern of abuse in Whitney's marriage became public knowledge through police reports and hospital visits. 4 years before their divorce, officers from the Fulton County Police Department were called to Houston and Brown's home in Atlanta, Georgia, on December 7, 2003, after she alleged that he struck her with his open right hand and left her with a cut lip and a bruise on her left cheek. "He spit on me," Houston told Winfrey. "He spit on me. He actually spit on me. And my daughter was coming down the stairs, and she saw that." The woman Eddie remembered as funny and sweet was being systematically destroyed by the man she had chosen over him. Bobby would book hotel rooms on different floors so that he could sleep with other women, while Whitney sank deeper into depression. He and his friends would laugh at and taunt Whitney's drug-induced dysfunctional and sorry state. The humiliation was public and constant. Eddie Murphy, the man who had built his career on laughter, was watching the woman he loved become a punchline. Every tabloid headline, every gossip column mention, every paparazzi photo of Whitney looking frail and broken was a reminder of the phone call that had gone unheeded. The cruel irony is that everything Eddie had feared about Bobby Brown came true. According to the 2008 biography, Bobby Brown, The Truth, The Whole Truth, and Nothing But, Brown said his marriage to Houston was doomed from the very beginning. I think we got married for all the wrong reasons. Even Bobby himself admitted the marriage was a mistake. By 2006, Whitney Houston filed for divorce from Bobby Brown. Over the years, her marriage to the singer was mired with controversy, drug abuse, physical abuse, and an alleged infidelity. But the damage was done. The Whitney Houston who had rejected Eddie Murphy's warnings was gone, replaced by a woman struggling with addiction, trauma, and broken dreams. Eddie Murphy's silence during these years wasn't indifference, it was self-preservation. What could he say? "I told you so" wasn't going to help anyone. All he could do was watch the tragedy unfold and wonder if one phone call could have changed everything. For 20 years after Whitney's death in 2012, Eddie Murphy maintained his public stance. They were just friends, nothing more. But at 64, something has shifted. The careful denials are softening into something more honest, more vulnerable. The man who built his career on never showing weakness is finally letting the mask slip.
And we were both, coming out around the same time in the 80s, both were getting in the mix around the same time. So we were contemporaries, and we were both, young and black.
When Eddie talks about their shared experience as young black entertainers in the 1980s, you can hear the connection he felt with Whitney. They understood each other's world in a way few others could. The pressure, the expectations, the careful navigation of being successful black artists in a predominantly white industry, these were bonds that went deeper than romance. Tragic. That's the word Eddie chooses when he thinks about Whitney now. Not sad or unfortunate, tragic, like a Shakespearean play where the ending was inevitable but still devastating. The weight in his voice when he says it suggests this isn't just professional regret, it's deeply personal. The truth that Eddie is slowly revealing is that Whitney Houston wasn't just a friend or a casual romantic interest. Throughout the late 80s, comedy superstar Eddie Murphy and Whitney dated, reportedly falling head over heels for one another. She was the one who got away, the relationship that could have changed both their lives if the timing had been different. Eddie Murphy has had a convoluted love life, but it seems that the actor and comedian has finally found the love of his life in actress Paige Butcher. Now happily married to Paige Butcher, Eddie has the perspective that only comes with age and emotional security. He can finally acknowledge what Whitney meant to him without it threatening his current happiness. The pattern of Eddie's relationships after Whitney tells its own story. Murphy met model Nicole Mitchell in 1988, and the two got married in 1993. The marriage lasted until 2006, when Nicole filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. His marriage to Nicole lasted 13 years, but even that substantial relationship couldn't erase the memory of what he had lost. His second marriage to TV producer Tracy Edmonds in 2008 after getting engaged the year prior. The two then split 2 weeks after their French-Polynesian wedding. A 2-week marriage suggests someone running from intimacy rather than toward it. The wounds from losing Whitney were still too fresh. One of the most media-followed relationships that Eddie had was with Spice Girl, Mel B. The two dated in 2006, and Mel gave birth to their daughter, Angel Iris. Even this relationship was marked by drama and denial. Eddie denied paternity of Angel, but it was later confirmed with a DNA test. A man who was once capable of deep connection had become someone who ran from responsibility. The common thread through all these relationships is emotional unavailability, the same quality that had driven Whitney away in the first place. It's as if losing her had taught Eddie that love was dangerous, that commitment led to pain, so he spent decades protecting himself from ever feeling that vulnerable again. But now, at 64, with a stable marriage and grown children, Eddie Murphy can finally afford to be honest about what Whitney Houston really meant to him. The regret isn't just about losing her. It's about never having the chance to prove he could have been the man she needed him to be. When Whitney died alone in that Beverly Hills hotel bathtub in 2012, the cause of death was determined to be heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. Eddie Murphy lost more than a friend. He lost the possibility of redemption, the chance to say he was sorry, the opportunity to prove that his warning phone call had come from love rather than selfishness. That's the tragedy he carries now. Not just that she's gone, but that she never knew how much she really meant to him. At 64, Eddie Murphy has reached the age where legacy matters more than image. The careful media training, the protective denials, the strategic distance from painful memories. All of it is giving way to something more authentic. For the first time in 3 decades, he's willing to let the world see the real story of what Whitney Houston meant to him. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. When interviewers ask about Whitney now, Eddie's responses are longer, more thoughtful, tinged with genuine emotion rather than practiced deflection. The man who spent 30 years insisting they were just friends is finally acknowledging the depth of what they shared.
She was a beautiful person. With a really, I hear a lot of people talking about her sense of humor. She really did have a great sense of humor. She was a funny girl.
The way Eddie describes Whitney reveals something profound about their connection. He doesn't focus on her voice, her beauty, or her fame, the things everyone else talks about. He remembers her humor, her personality, the private woman behind the public image. These are the memories of someone who knew her intimately, who valued her for who she was rather than what she represented. The truth Eddie is finally ready to acknowledge is that Whitney Houston was the love of his life. Not his longest relationship, not his most publicized romance, but the woman who showed him what real connection could feel like. Melanie Brown sued Murphy for the full legal and physical sole custody of their daughter. Despite the negative emotions, a source told People that Murphy is an amazing father to Angel. She texts Eddie and is on the phone with him all the time. She loves her dad. Even with other women, even as a father to 10 children, Whitney remains the relationship that defined all others. The phone call he made on her wedding day wasn't possessiveness or jealousy. It was the desperate attempt of a man who realized he was about to lose something irreplaceable. By 1992, Eddie had matured enough to understand what he had let slip away in the 1980s. He had seen enough of Bobby Brown to know the marriage would be destructive. But most importantly, he had finally understood that his pattern of emotional unavailability had cost him the one woman who could have been his true partner.
I may have gone to dinner with her a few times, but it was never like we were dating. We were never boyfriends and girlfriends.
Oh,
we were
really?
we're just acquaintances and very, very friendly acquaintances.
Even now, Eddie struggles with full disclosure. The words, "I spent some time around her socially," are doing heavy lifting, covering years of connection, intimacy, and missed opportunities. But the evolution in his language is significant. He's moved from never dating to acknowledging they spent significant time together, from just friends to very friendly acquaintances. The truth he's approaching is that their relationship defied easy categorization. They weren't officially dating, but they were more than friends. They weren't committed, but they were connected in ways that transcended casual romance. It was the kind of undefined but meaningful relationship that only makes sense to the people living it. Bobby Brown still believes his marriage to Whitney Houston could have been salvaged if not for the throes of drug addiction. Even Bobby Brown, the man who won Whitney, understands that their marriage was doomed by forces beyond their control. But Eddie Murphy knows something Bobby never understood. Whitney needed protection, not chaos. She needed stability, not drama. She needed someone who would shield her from the world's cruelty. not someone who would add to it. The final truth Eddie Murphy is ready to acknowledge is that he failed her. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but through the kind of emotional cowardice that destroys possibilities before they can become realities. He was young, successful, and convinced that love would always be available when he was ready for it. By the time he realized how rare their connection was, she was walking down the aisle to someone else. At 64, Eddie Murphy has learned that some mistakes don't get second chances. Some phone calls come too late. Some loves, once lost, never come back. Whitney Houston was all of these things. The mistake he couldn't fix, the call he shouldn't have waited to make, the love he'll carry for the rest of his life. That's the truth he's finally ready to tell. Whitney Houston wasn't just his friend, wasn't just a romantic interest, wasn't just a missed opportunity. She was the woman who could have been his everything, if only he had been brave enough to love her when it mattered. Now she's gone, and Eddie Murphy is left with a lifetime of wondering what could have been, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest tragedies are the ones we create ourselves. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.